The flashing lights of the cameras were just another Tuesday for Silas Vance. As the CEO of Vance Enterprises, a massive real estate empire, his life was a series of calculated risks and perfectly staged press conferences. He was a man made of cold logic and tailored suits, known for dismantling rival companies before his morning coffee. But nothing could have prepared him for the frantic phone call he received from his head of security. His 4-year-old daughter Lily had wandered off during a supervised outing at the luxury shopping pavilion Silas had just acquired. Ilara Thorne wiped the sweat from her forehead, leaning against her janitorial cart. The uniform was scratchy, and her muscles ached from pulling double shifts, but it paid the rent. She was scrubbing a stubborn stain near the grand glass balconies of the 3rd floor when she heard the scream. It was a terrifying, high-pitched sound. Ilara dropped her mop. Near the edge of a newly installed kinetic art display, a heavy steel structure was giving way. Right beneath it, frozen in terror, was a little girl holding a plush rabbit. Ilara did not think. She did not hesitate. She sprinted across the polished marble floor, tackling the child out of the way, just as the massive steel beams crashed down, shattering the glass and sending dust billowing through the air. The impact of the fall knocked the breath out of Ilara, her arm scraping harshly against the debris. But she curled her body around the trembling girl, shielding her from the shrapnel. When the dust settled, chaos erupted. Onlookers screamed, and security guards rushed over. Ilara gently pulled back, looking into the little girl's wide, tear-filled eyes. She brushed the dust from the child's blonde hair, speaking in a soft, soothing whisper, until the girl buried her face in Ilara's neck, clinging to her scratchy uniform like a lifeline. By the time Silas arrived, the pavilion was swarming with paramedics and reporters. The media had already caught wind of the near tragedy. He pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding in a rare display of sheer panic, until he saw her. Lily was sitting on the back of an ambulance, completely unharmed, refusing to let go of the hand of a cleaning lady whose uniform was torn and covered in dust and blood. Silas approached, his imposing figure silencing the murmuring crowd. He looked at the woman who had saved his world. She did not shrink under his intense, intimidating gaze. Instead, she met his eyes with a fierce, unwavering dignity. "Thank you," Silas said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Name your price. Whatever you want, it is yours." Ilara looked at the billionaire, her expression hardening. She recognized that face, Silas Vance, the man whose corporate takeover had bankrupted her father's shipping company 5 years ago, leading to her family's complete ruin. She tightened her grip on her own pride. "Keep your money, Mr. Vance," Ilara said, her voice steady and loud enough for the reporters to hear. "I did not save a bank account. I saved a child. See that you pay better attention to her." Before Silas could process the sting of her rejection, cameras flashed violently. The headline was already writing itself: "The arrogant billionaire and the selfless heroine." The next morning, Silas sat in his penthouse office, staring out at the city's skyline. His lawyer, Preston, paced the room with a grim expression. The mall incident was a public relations nightmare, but that was the least of their problems. Vivian Croft, Silas's ex-fiancée and Lily's biological mother, had filed for full custody. Vivian cared nothing for the child. She only wanted the massive trust fund tied to Lily, and she was using the mall accident to prove Silas was a negligent father. "Vivian will win," Preston warned, tossing a legal dossier onto the glass desk. "The judge will look at your ruthless reputation, the accident, and Vivian's perfectly crafted victim persona. You need a miracle, Silas. You need a stable family image. You need a wife immediately." Silas's jaw clenched. He looked at the newspaper on his desk. The front page featured a large photo of Ilara, fierce and protective, holding Lily. Lily, who had not spoken a word since Vivian abandoned them 2 years ago, had actually whispered a thank you to that cleaning lady. "Find her," Silas commanded, pointing to the photo. When Ilara was escorted into the Vance Enterprises boardroom hours later, she was dressed in a simple faded sweater, but she carried herself like a queen walking into enemy territory. Silas sat at the head of the long table, evaluating her. He offered her a seat, but she chose to stand. "I am not here for a payout," Ilara stated clearly. "If you called me here to offer me a ridiculously large check to sign a non-disclosure agreement, you are wasting my time." "I called you here to offer you a job," Silas replied smoothly, folding his hands. "A very specific job. I need a wife." Ilara laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You must be out of your mind." Silas stood, closing the distance between them. His presence was suffocating, thick with power and authority. "My ex-fiancée is trying to take my daughter. Lily trusts no one, but she clung to you. The media loves you. You are the working-class hero, the perfect contrast to my ruthless image. Marry me for 1 year. Act as Lily's stepmother. In exchange, I will pay off every single debt you have, buy you a home and set you up for life." Ilara felt her breath catch. The debts her father had left behind after Vance Enterprises crushed them were drowning her. But marrying the architect of her family's destruction, it was unthinkable. Yet she remembered the terror in little Lily's eyes. The child was an innocent pawn in a vicious game. And perhaps, Ilara thought, being on the inside of Silas Vance's empire would give her the perfect opportunity to find the evidence she needed to clear her father's ruined name. "I accept," Ilara said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "But we have rules. We do not sleep in the same room. We do not pretend to be in love behind closed doors. And you will never, ever try to control me." Silas's lips twitched in a faint, dangerous smile. "Deal." The wedding took place 3 days later in the sterile, opulent hall of the city courthouse. There were no flowers, no tears of joy, only the rapid clicking of paparazzi cameras outside. Ilara wore a simple white dress she had bought off the rack, deliberately ignoring the designer gowns Silas had sent to her apartment. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Silas turned to her. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her cheek in a perfectly calculated show for the witnesses. Ilara remained stiff, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Vance," he whispered. Ilara looked past his shoulder and caught sight of a woman standing at the back of the hall, Vivienne Croft. The ex-fiancée was glaring at Ilara with a toxic mixture of shock and pure hatred. The war had just begun, and Ilara knew that surviving the Vance family would be far more dangerous than standing under a collapsing building. The sprawling penthouse at the top of the Vance Tower felt less like a home and more like a fortress of glass and cold steel. For Ilara, the first few weeks of the arrangement were a masterclass in survival. Her bedroom was located at the far end of the corridor, a physical reflection of the emotional distance between her and her new husband. During the day, Silas was a ghost, swallowed by the demands of his empire. But Ilara found her purpose in Lily. The little girl, who had been completely silent for months, began to slowly emerge from her shell, spending hours tracing colorful drawings on the living room floor while Ilara hummed soft melodies. One evening, Silas returned early. He paused in the doorway, watching his daughter giggle as Ilara clumsily attempted to build a lopsided castle out of wooden blocks. He felt an unfamiliar, sharp tightness in his chest. Silas was a man accustomed to transactions, but the genuine warmth echoing in his sterile home felt like a foreign currency he did not know how to spend. The uneasy peace was shattered by the impending Vance charity gala. It was their first public appearance since the courthouse, and the media was watching closely. The night before the event, Silas walked into Ilara's room and placed a heavy velvet box on her vanity. Inside rested a diamond necklace worth more than her life. Silas commanded her to wear it, stating that the press needed to see his wife looking the part of a billionaire's equal. Ilara closed the box with a sharp snap and pushed it back across the table. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple, worn silver locket that had belonged to her mother. She told him that she was his wife on paper, not a porcelain doll to be dressed up for his investors. Silas stepped closer, his jaw tight, trying to use his sheer physical presence to intimidate her into submission. But Ilara did not look away. She challenged him openly, stating that if he wanted a mannequin, he had married the wrong woman. For the first time in his life, Silas backed down. He saw the fierce pride in her eyes, and a flicker of deep, reluctant respect took root in his mind. The gala was a glittering sea of predatory smiles and expensive champagne. Ilara held her own, navigating the whispers with quiet dignity. But danger was circling. Vivian Croft slithered through the crowd and cornered Ilara near the balcony. The ex-fiancée was dressed in aggressive red silk, her voice dripping with venom. Vivian mocked Ilara's worn hands and janitorial past, threatening to expose her as a fraud and take Lily away forever. Ilara did not flinch. She stepped directly into Vivian's space, her voice low and steady. She calmly dismantled the woman's hollow threats, exposing the sad emptiness of a mother who only wanted a child for a trust fund. Silas watched from afar, completely captivated by the fire and protective fury in his new wife. But that same fire soon turned on him. Later that week, late at night, Silas found Ilara standing in his dimly lit home office. She was staring intently at a framed newspaper clipping on the wall, an article celebrating the ruthless acquisition of Thorn Shipping 5 years ago. Silas demanded to know what she was doing. The air in the room grew thick and heavy with tension. Ilara turned around, her eyes burning with unshed tears and years of suppressed rage. She did not yell. Her quiet voice cut deeper than any scream. She told him that Arthur Thorn was her father. She detailed how Silas's aggressive, predatory dismantling of the company left her family with nothing. She explained how the stress broke her father's spirit, leading to the sudden heart attack that took his life. She had agreed to this fake marriage, not just to protect Lily, but to look into the eyes of the man who had destroyed her world. The revelation struck Silas like a physical blow. He had always viewed failing companies as numbers on a spreadsheet, collateral damage in the pursuit of growth. He had never considered the human cost. The silence that followed her confession was heavier than any argument they had ever had. For weeks after that night, the penthouse felt like a tomb. Ilara spoke to Silas only when absolutely necessary, freezing him out with a polite, devastating distance. Silas found himself desperate to bridge the gap, haunted by the pain he had caused her. He knew money could not fix this. Instead, he started paying attention to the small things. When she fell asleep on the couch reading a storybook to Lily, he did not wake her. He gently draped a blanket over her shoulders. He remembered exactly how she took her tea and started leaving a steaming mug on the kitchen counter before he left for work. He even cancelled a high-stakes dinner with foreign investors just to sit quietly in the living room, while she and Lily watched a movie, offering a silent, steady presence. Just as the thick ice between them began to show signs of thawing, disaster struck. Vivian had not been idle. She had paid off a disgruntled former employee of the courthouse and leaked a twisted version of their arrangement to the press. The morning news declared their marriage a fraudulent scheme orchestrated to trick the family court. The reporters painted Ilara as a manipulative opportunist who had staged the mall accident to trap a billionaire. Worse, Vivian's lawyers filed an emergency injunction to remove Lily from the home immediately, citing a toxic and deceptive environment. The walls were rapidly closing in. Silas looked at the breaking news on the television, realizing that all his wealth and power could not buy the one thing he was now utterly terrified of losing. The emergency custody hearing was held in a private, wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of old paper and impending doom. Vivian sat at the plaintiff table, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a smirk of absolute victory. She had the media on a leash and the judge looking sternly at Silas and Ilara. When the proceedings began, Vivian's lawyer painted a tragic picture of a mother desperately trying to rescue her daughter from a cold corporate transaction orchestrated by a ruthless billionaire and an opportunistic cleaning lady. Silas sat rigidly, his hands folded. He had spent his entire career anticipating his opponent's moves, but today it was Ilara who stood up when it was their turn to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not beg. Instead, she placed a small digital audio drive on the judge's bench. She explained that while Vivian was busy bribing court officials to leak twisted stories, she had carelessly left a voicemail on the phone of a former business associate who despised her. The judge plugged the drive into his terminal and pressed play. Vivian's sharp, intoxicated voice echoed through the silent courtroom. She was laughing, boasting about how easy it was going to be to secure the massive trust fund, and explicitly stating her plans to ship Lily off to a strict, year-round boarding school in Switzerland the moment the custody papers were signed. the color completely drained from Vivienne's face. The smirk shattered into pure panic. The judge's expression turned to stone. Within minutes, the injunction was fiercely dismissed, and Vivienne was escorted out of the courtroom, publicly humiliated and facing immediate legal consequences for extortion and perjury. The media waiting outside caught every single moment of her frantic, tearful disgrace, abandoning her entirely. That evening, the penthouse was incredibly quiet, but the heavy, suffocating tension of the past weeks had finally evaporated. Ilara stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering city lights, her shoulders finally relaxed. Silas walked softly into the room, holding a thick, leather-bound folder. He did not offer her diamonds, and he did not offer her a check. He handed her the folder. Inside were the deeds, the reinstated corporate charter, and the complete asset portfolio for Thorn Shipping. Silas looked into her eyes, his voice thick with an emotion he had never allowed himself to show to anyone. He told her that he had spent the last 2 weeks quietly buying back every single ship, warehouse, and contract he had stripped from her father 5 years ago. He had placed the entire restored company solely in her name. He confessed that he could not rewrite the past, and he knew he did not deserve her, but he wanted to spend the rest of his life helping her build her future. He asked for her forgiveness, not as a billionaire securing an asset, but as a man who had finally realized that his massive empire was completely worthless without her in it. Ilara looked at the documents, tears spilling over her eyelashes. She dropped the folder onto the desk and closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms around his neck, finally letting the heavy walls around her heart crumble to the ground. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. The cold, sterile penthouse in the city had been traded for a warm, sprawling estate in the countryside, filled with natural sunlight and the constant sound of laughter. Ilara stood at the head of the newly revived Thorn Shipping, a fiercely respected leader in the industry, proving that her father's legacy could thrive once again with the right support. But her greatest joy was waiting for her out on the lawn. Silas, the once ruthless and unapproachable corporate shark, was covered in mud, laughing freely as he chased a very happy Lily and their new golden retriever across the grass. Ilara watched them from the wooden porch, holding a warm cup of tea, knowing that the greatest risk Silas Vance ever took was betting on a broken woman, and it had yielded the most beautiful reward of their lives. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good story about love, justice, and second chances. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with all of our upcoming stories. We will see you next time.
The visual analysis of Silas Vance and Ilara Thorne's journey illustrates a profound transformation from cold corporate calculation to genuine human connection, breaking down the psychological and social barriers that initially separated them. At the beginning of the narrative, we observe a stark contrast between two entirely different worlds colliding through a sudden crisis. Silas represents the pinnacle of corporate power, a man who navigates life through transactions and views vulnerabilities as weaknesses. On the other hand, Ilara embodies working-class resilience and selfless heroism. When the kinetic art display collapses, it serves as a physical catalyst that shatters the protective glass of Silas' insulated world, forcing him to acknowledge a reality where money cannot immediately fix everything. The analysis highlights this initial incident not just as a plot point, but as a psychological trigger that exposes the deepest fears of a man who thought he had everything under perfect control. As the narrative progresses into the proposition of a fake marriage, the social and ethical dimensions of the story deepen significantly. Silas attempts to solve a deeply emotional problem, his ex-fiancée Vivienne threatening to take custody of his traumatized daughter, using a ruthless business strategy. He essentially tries to buy a human being to serve as a public relations shield. Ilara agrees, but not out of greed. Her motivation is rooted in survival and a hidden desire for justice regarding her father's ruined shipping company. This phase of the analysis points out the ethical friction between Silas' manipulative self-preservation and Ilara's fierce integrity. However, the forced proximity within the sterile penthouse initiates an unexpected period of healing and psychological growth. Lily, who had been completely silent due to the trauma of abandonment, begins to find her voice again through genuine affection. This shift demonstrates that authentic care and a safe emotional environment are far more powerful than opulent wealth. Through Ilara's quiet rebellion, refusing to be treated like a porcelain doll adorned with diamonds for the media, Silas is forced to confront his own toxic behaviors and recognize her inherent dignity. The turning point of the analysis focuses on the concept of corporate responsibility and the human cost of unbridled ambition. When Ilara reveals her true identity as the daughter of the man Silas bankrupted, the narrative transitions from a simple drama to a profound commentary on grief and justice. Silas is forced to look beyond his spreadsheets and see the devastating generational trauma his aggressive business tactics have caused in the real world. The climax in the courtroom, where Vivian's manipulative and selfish nature is exposed through her own recorded words, solidifies the downfall of pure greed and superficial motives. The resolution of the story transcends a simple apology or a financial payout. True redemption, as depicted in the final stages of their journey, requires restorative action. By quietly buying back the shipping empire and placing it entirely in Ilara's name, Silas dismantles his own ego to repair the damage he caused. The story concludes by showing a complete redefinition of success, moving from a cold city penthouse to a warm countryside estate, proving that genuine love, integrity, and accountability are the most valuable assets a person can ever cultivate.